The book that made me a reader, one book that I remember more than any other, was a book called King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table by a writer called Roger Lancelyn Green. And it was a collection of myths and legends about King Arthur, who's a very important character in English, British mythology. Lots of legends about knights going through forests and having adventures and going on quests and saving damsels in distress and being challenged by monsters and by demons. And it's a beautiful book. I don't have a copy because I'm not actually at home at the moment. Because I'm in lockdown somewhere else. I'm in lockdown in my wife's house beside Bath. But I have a picture of the book on my computer. And that was the book, King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. And one of the things that I particularly loved about it and love about it is that it has amazing illustrations. These illustrations are by a German illustrator called Lotte Reininger, and they're wonderful black and white, gorgeous things. And I think one of the things that the book did for me was to encourage my love of language, love of stories, but also my love of illustration, my love of how beautiful books can be. So that was one of my main books that turned me into a reader, King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table by Roger Lancelyn Green. I don't know if it's in Italian, it should be. Yeah, my books do seem to be filled with subterranean themes about things deep down below ground, but also things that are high up in the sky as well. And I think what I'm interested in is that contrast between things deep down underground and dark and things high up in the sky and filled with light. Maybe the subterranean thing comes from when I was a boy. I grew up in a town which was an old mining town, and I was aware when I was walking around the fields and streets that below me were the tunnels from old pit workings that men and boys used to go down under the ground to dig out coal. So that obviously had a big influence on me. Also, I was brought up as a Catholic, so the sense of heaven up there in the light and hell down there in the darkness just became part of my imagination. And then going on to, well, Orpheus, for instance. Orpheus, the perfect example of someone who explores the darkness underground, because he goes down there, he goes to death, he goes down to death. And he tries, in a sense, to take the light of the world and the music of the world down to death, to make death give him back his lost love again. So yeah, I'm fascinated by those contrasts. We walk on the surface of the world, but below us is deep darkness, and above us is all this glorious light filled with birdsong and clouds and sunshine and stars, and down there is the darkness. So that's why I kind of work with darkness and light and underground and the lovely overground. I do find myself writing a lot about myths and drawing my material from myths, and I think it's because myths, mythology, all the ancient stories, they never disappear. They tell us something profound about ourselves. It's like the myth of Orpheus. It draws together so many things about what it means to be alive. It questions what love is. It questions what death is. It suggests what music might be. It suggests what poetry might be. And it's a story that was told thousands and thousands of years ago. It's one of the oldest stories ever told, and it keeps on being important and being important. Look at all the different versions there have been of the Orpheus myth. Other myths that are really important to me are the myth of Icarus and Daedalus. Icarus, who put feathers and wax on his skin and flew with his father Daedalus away from Crete. And of course, Icarus flew too close to the sun, the wax melted, the feathers fell off, and he fell into the sea. It tells something really important about our aspiration to be more than we are, to fly, to be able to reach the sky. Other myths, the myth of Persephone in the underworld. She has to stay in the underworld for half every year in the darkness, but then every 6 months she comes up again from the darkness, and when she comes up from the darkness she brings the light and the spring back. What a wonderful story, what a wonderful way to describe how the world works. So myths are ancient stories which tell us something very important about ourselves and about our world, and even though very ancient, they are always brand new. One book I'd like to recommend you to read after this interview is over is a book that was hugely helpful to me when I was writing A Song for Ella Gray. And it's this book called Orpheus, The Song of Life by a writer called Anne Rowe. And it's an amazing book all about the Orpheus myth and about the possibilities, all the different meanings. As you can see, I went through and plundered lots of ideas and underlined and highlighted and kind of made the book me, made the book mine, which is what I do. And it talks about other writers who've written about the Orpheus myth, like Rilke, musicians like John Cage. The music that's been written about them asks whether Orpheus actually existed. Was he a real person in Greece all those years ago? It also talks about Orpheus, about Eurydice, and it was just, for me, when I was writing A Song for Ella Gray, this was the book that really helped me more than any other. As well as all the music I listened to and all the other poetry I read and all the other books I read, this was the one. I don't know if it's available in Italian. I suspect it might be, because Anne Rowe is a wonderful writer. I'd love to be able to show you where I do usually write, but I'm not where I normally work at the moment. I'm in Bath, in my wife's house. We live between Bath and Newcastle. So my office is actually in Newcastle with all of my workspace. But what I can do is to show you my workspace here and how I work here. So I have a desk, a table, and I have my notebooks. For me, notebooks are central to the whole process. I love notebooks. I love artist sketchbooks with blank pages like this. And I use lots of pens and pencils. And I have my lovely coloured pencils, which I just love. Aren't they beautiful? And when I'm writing, I spend time working in my notebooks and making pages like that. So they're kind of notes for what might be in a story, but they're also kind of explorations. And as you see, I do pictures, and these are the notes for a piece that I've just written for the radio about what it's like to be in lockdown, what it's like to be living in a time of pandemic, where we might go to in our minds. So I use my coloured pencils and my pens to try and create, try and invent, try and discover what might be in that piece. I love to do this kind of thing, to be messy, to be playful. This is a bit more about that radio piece. See, I do pictures. There's the sky and the sun and some birds in it. Not a very good picture of the house. I keep returning to Orpheus. I'm going to be writing another piece about Orpheus quite soon, next week. So Orpheus keeps on appearing. I do doodles just to keep myself kind of relaxed and happy. But also, it's a way of exploring. It's a way of trying to find out what might be in a story. I do drawings and pictures of different things. And then I, of course, use my lovely computer. And what the computer does, it starts to make the stuff orderly. It kind of gets things into order. It begins to look more like a published thing. So it's the kind of moving from notebooks using coloured pencils to printed products like this. And I love that whole process. And this is where I'm doing it at the moment. And as you can see, it's a beautiful spot. We are in the southwest of England. It's a beautiful sunny day. Okay, so I'll read a little section from A Song for Ella Gray. The piece I'm going to read is when Orpheus speaks to Eurydice, to Ella Gray, for the very first time. He's on the beach in northeastern England. The other kids have found him. They've been talking to him. He's been playing his lyre, and then he plays again, and then he comes across Ella Gray. He plucked the strings, and his impatience left him. The sea grew still, we grew still. He sang, and if there was a way to put music into words, I'd do it. If there was a way to fill the spaces between words with the sound of him, the sound of the sea, the sound of the birds, the sound of the breeze and the grass of the dunes, the sound of the rolling pebbles and the turning sand, I'd do it. He played, and it felt as if we were filled with life as we listened, and as if we almost died. Somehow I managed to think of Ella, and I took out my phone. Somehow there was some power in it. I dialed her number and held the phone out so that she could hear him. Just listen, I whispered before she could speak. He played and sang. He saw the phone and he laughed. Who's that? He said. My friend, I managed to say. Why is she not here? He said. They wouldn't let her. They? He came closer. He took the phone from me and grinned and put it to his lips. You should be here as well, he said. Take no notice of they. Then he sang directly into it, soft, sweet, hypnotic. I thought of her in a boring, narrow house with her boring, narrow parents, lifted away from all the boring narrowness by Orpheus's sound. Who are you? He said. He repeated it. Who are you? He sang again with his eyes closed and held the phone to his lips as if he wanted to pour himself with the sound right into it and into Ella's ear. Ella, the beautiful, dreamy one. I imagined her now, with her phone to her cheek, dreamier than ever, lost in the music just like we were, gone. I imagined her silence. Orpheus laughed. Speak to us, he said. Tell us your name. I imagined her dream of whispering voice as she struggled to reply. Ella Gray, he said. Now speak again, Ella Gray. He listened. He laughed softly. This is a song for Ella Gray, he said. And he breathed a low, sweet song into the phone and into Ella's ear so many miles away. And then silence. His face seemed to darken. Say your name again, he whispered. Aye, he said. Just like that, Ella. He sighed as she spoke. He sang a few more lingering notes. Then he placed the phone into my hand. She's called Ella Gray, he whispered. Yes, I said, Ella Gray. She must be very beautiful, he said. She is. He closed his eyes. I see her, he said. Hell's teeth, I can see her. Then he slung the lyre across his back and turned away from us and headed into the dunes. Orpheus, we called, don't go away yet. He turned back for a moment and he held his hand up against the brightness of the sky. Don't follow, he said. I'll find you. You find me. How? I said. Because you have to. Then he was gone. We did try to follow. He went to the dunes. We saw his footsteps and the slither marks of snakes. We saw his black hair in the distance, his purple coat. Then we weren't certain if we saw. There, we said. And then it was over. And the dunes and the fields were just the dunes and the fields. And the silence was just the breeze and the sea. Orpheus had wandered. He was gone. I whispered into the phone. Ella, I said. Ella. But the phone was dead. Ella was gone.